This dude just had drumming inside of his soul from the get, you know?
Being somebody who rode around in vans with bands in the 90s, drummers are annoying as because they can't sit still. They're always tapping on something or hitting something or tapping their jeans or tapping I mean, you're just like, Jesus, will you fucking stop over there with that?
Welcome to Rock and Roll Book Club, where we discuss books by and about musicians and the music business. I'm Shelley, and on this episode, me and my co-hosts Dave and Jen are digging into The Storyteller by Dave Grohl of Nirvana and Foo Fighters fame. Don't know him? You might be living under a rock. If you haven't read the book, this is your one and only spoiler alert. Hey everybody, welcome to Rock and Roll Book Club. I'm here with my co-hosts Dave and Jen, and today we're going to get into The Storyteller by Dave Grohl.
Look at that.
There he is in the print,
Nirvana shirt.
in the shirt. Love it. So Dave, get us started with a little bit of background about Dave Grohl. Give us the facts, give us the history. What do we need to know about him before we discuss his book?
Yeah, well, the facts on Dave Grohl are he is one of the most successful rock stars of the last 3 decades. He's not only been in one major band, which is difficult enough for most artists, never get into that major band. He's actually been in 2. So in addition to being the drummer for Nirvana during their peak years, after Nirvana, he formed the Foo Fighters, and they've been extremely successful as well. And they've been going for nearly 30 years at this point, 28, I think, or 29 or something at this point.
And for those who don't know, if you're not a Foo Fighters fan, guitarist and vocalist. So not only was he in 2 major bands, he played totally different instruments, which is
he
amazing.
Switched from becoming from the behind the drum guy to the front man drummer. And there are only a handful of cases where people have ever even tried that. And there's a limit of about maybe 1 that's been successful, and that's him.
Wow.
To where people don't have almost forgot. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't know that Dave Grohl was actually in Nirvana. People have, like, I mean, I think you have to have been born in the 90s or newer to not realize that, but still, there's that meme that was going around. There was that meme that was going around that said, like, if Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters just shaved his beard, he'd look exactly like the drummer of Nirvana. Like, not realizing they're the same guy. And it's like, okay. So people did kind of forget that, but no. So Grohl's been one of the biggest deals. He's also done stints in Queens of the Stone Age. He had a group called Them Crooked Vultures with Josh Homme from Queens and John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin. He had this heavy metal band called Probot. He's done collaborations with a million other artists. He's been a producer. He's produced the band Verbena. He's produced a couple other groups. So he has had a pretty wide-ranging career. And at this point, with the way that the mainstream music world has shook out, there's very little rock in the mainstream music scene today. It's very much pop and hip hop. And Dave Grohl stands as like one of the lone rock bands out there that gets invited to things like the Grammys or gets invited to play at this award ceremony or that. They're the rock representative now because there's so few rock bands in the mainstream. And so that's what Dave Grohl seems to represent now. So that's the context on him. He's one of the bigger deals of the last three decades.
I think it's so interesting too that his start was really in the punk rock scene, and to move from that to more of a straight up rock and roll, it went like punk and then grunge and then rock is really interesting evolution.
He represents the mainstream of rock, whereas when he started in the 80s with Scream, it was the antithesis of that. It was to be against what was the mainstream of rock. Now he is the mainstream of rock. Let's get into our impressions, because this is what I wanted to get. One of the things I wanted to get into, like our impressions of Dave Grohl prior to reading the book. Now mine are, I'm a fan. Okay. Nirvana is one of my favorite groups ever. Okay. I love Nirvana. There was a time where I was absolutely obsessed with them. I had every single 12-inch, every 7-inch, every the UK press, the Australian press, the whatever. Okay, they were one of and still remain one of my bands. The Foo Fighters, I like. I like the Foo Fighters. I love Nirvana. And
Mhm.
so for me, maybe just because my age, because I'm about to turn 53, like I always will see Dave Grohl as the guy from Nirvana instead of the guy from the Foo Fighters. And I know that's not the way most people see him, but that is always going to be my impression. I will always remember him as behind the drums and being from Seattle and being a part of that music world because 1991, I was 20. That was like one of the greatest years ever, you know?
Mhm.
So there's just so much positivity associated with that period for me, anyways, that's the way I always will see him. And those are my impressions of Dave.
I would first like to point out that this is my daughter's shirt. So
I
there you
love your
go.
daughter. That's
She's 13. Well, but here's the deal. She's wearing it for the shirt. She's got a purple sweatshirt. She's got the first Nirvana album, you know, what was that? What Nirvana? What the yellow?
Bleach.
Bleach.
Yes, that's the one. So she's got all these, you know, t-shirts that she loves. And my husband sat down with her one night and said, you have to know at least 5 songs that they sing. So
Yeah,
kind of,
agreed.
yeah.
Agreed.
There was another meme
To your
of
husband.
there was another meme that I saw on TikTok of a baby wearing a Nirvana onesie and some guy coming up and goes, "Name 3 songs, poser," you know, whatever, yelling at the baby like
It's so true. I mean, she's
yeah.
got a million of these shirts, and I'm like, you know, sooner or later we're going to get there. But moving on from that, I think Dave Grohl is, you know, he's everywhere, and he's always been everywhere. And
Mhm.
he kind of bugs just because he's everywhere. But after this book, I really do like him. He's insanely talented. He's kind, and he's really freaking good. So I would say, you know, Nirvana and Foos, uh, you know, obviously there's a considerable difference between them, between the sounds to a certain degree,
Oh yeah.
but you know, I'm kind of torn on which one I choose. I don't know. It would probably be the Foos, and I don't know why. Well, I do know why. It's just a little bit more. I can understand the words.
There's a
So
lot
there.
more to choose from also.
Yes, exactly. And it's
True,
just a little
sadly.
bit more, you know, punk is, you know, whatever you want to call it is fine. But that whole grunge sound was never really my calling. So Dave Grohl, I think, is amazing though after all of this. And I think we're going to have a really good time talking about him.
Okay. Shelley?
Well, Dave, put me in that category you're in of he's always going to be from Nirvana to me.
Yeah.
I I was an early adopter of Nirvana back from the Bleach days, and yeah, they're one of my very favorite bands too. And so, you know, when I think about him, I think about the drummer of Nirvana. Um, and in terms of the Foo Fighters, I mean, I don't dislike their music. I don't own any of their albums. I had a few intentions to do some listening before we recorded and didn't get to it. But you know, I'm not against the Foo Fighters. I'm just not a fan in particular. But I will say about my relationship with Nirvana. Yeah, they're one of my very favorite bands, and I will never forget, you guys. So when Smells Like Teen Spirit, when that became a pop hit, I was fucking crushed. I will never forget that me and my friends, I was like, I don't know, I was probably 13, 14. I was driving around with one of my older friends, and the pop radio station KFRX was on. And all of a sudden I hear dung 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 dung, and I was like, what in the actual fuck is happening? What are they doing? Like, they're stealing our music. This isn't for you. This is for us. This is for, like, you know, the alternative kids, which is what we would have been called at that time. And it was just like, no, 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 stop, 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 don't.
Well,
And
and
then
you
of
see
course,
there
it just exploded after that.
that conflict was very much a conflict within Nirvana, and I think that ultimately ended up was being their demise because
Yeah.
on the one hand, they did sort of seek that level of success, not thinking it would ever happen, and then when it actually did, it was like, oh shit, like they weren't prepared for it at all, how to handle it, how to handle people that you have had this grudge against, you think they bullied and hated you your whole life, and now all of a sudden they're your biggest fans, and you don't know how to react to that. So there was a lot of that conflict. I remember that year, it was 1991. I worked in a record store, and my boss Liz got the CD single for "Smells Like Teen Spirit." It came in the mail, and
Kids watching, a CD is a round
yeah.
disc that you put into a machine and it would play the music.
So she threw the song "Smells Like Teen Spirit" on, and we were both just like, "What?" You know, the second that drum kicks in with the you know, and you're just like,
song.
"What is this?" And we played it 5 times in a row. Maybe we couldn't work. Okay, that song just struck a chord, and the way I've always described it was, on the next episode of Rock and Roll Book Club, we're reading The Dirt, Confessions of the World's Most Notorious Rock Band by Mötley Crüe. The book details the almost unbelievable antics of these LA hard rock legends. Almost. NPR's All Things Considered had this to say about The Dirt. As good as those other books may be, The Dirt is singularly the greatest sex, drugs, rock reading experience of our age. It's one of the all-time great rock bios. Not one sentence in its 448 pages is about Mötley's music, which is even more impressive and I guess appropriate. Now make sure to read up before the next episode, and if you're listening to the audiobook, just make sure there's no kids in the room. Nirvana summed up all of the best records that we'd been listening to for the previous 10 or 15 years. And they were able to push it all into one thing. And at that moment with that song, it signified the entire, like starting back with the Stooges in the 1960s and the Velvet Underground and through the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and the Clash, or whatever. They put everything into one thing. It hit at that moment. And it did actually change the world. And that's why I think, as good as the Foo Fighters are, they're not world changing. And Nirvana was. And that's not fair, because very few groups can have that kind of massive impact on society, on culture. Very few do. You know, the Beatles, you can say, did, and a couple of others, you know, the Bee Gees, I guess, did in the 70s for sure. And so some other groups, but Nirvana is a decade-defining group. The Foo Fighters are a highly successful rock band.
Yeah.
And there's just a difference. And that's not about you. You can prefer the Foo Fighters over Nirvana. It's not about that. But I think in terms of what they mean to music in general are just different. And that's the way I've always thought of it.
I feel like the Foos started bringing back great rock and roll. Do you know what I mean? I feel like for that time, there's just such a mismatch of what everything is and what genre you are and where you're being played. And I think the Foos came in just freaking blazing, ready to go. And
they outlasted the alternative nation, right? So all of that stuff that Nirvana helped usher in had kind of died in a mainstream fashion by like 1996, 97 or so. It was almost over. And then it was back into the era of pop music and the boy bands and all of the same garbage that we had been subjected to before. But Foo Fighters remain. Start with the early days. So Grohl's mom, Virginia Grohl, plays a massive role in his life and in the book, and is obviously one of the great example of a parent who just said, you know what, I'm not going to put my shit on you. I want you to be the best you can be. And so I'm going to allow you to do that. Unlike his dad, who was upset that he didn't want to be a junior version of him and sort of disowned him when he decided, well, fine, you want to play music and quit high school, then fine, screw you. But I think his mom is a major the major person in his life, more so than even his wife, more so than his kids, more so than any bandmate he's been in. I think she's been the central figure of his world.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the opening story is about her, and I think that's well, actually, no, I think it's about his daughter, and then he gets into her.
Yeah, there's an early story where about his mom would take him to those jazz shows and
Yeah.
in DC, and that's where he got his first like drum lesson, and his exposure to different kinds of music was through his mom too.
Yeah. And to expand on what you said, I absolutely loved how much he talked about how her letting him be who he was central to everything that came after that. Every success that he has, he credits her for that. And he does that in the beginning of the book. He does that at the end of the book. Also, if you get the expanded version, which I highly recommend, if only for the very first story in that called The Box, he talks a lot about how, she let me be me, and that was everything. And I think, that's one of the themes that emerges of the book is that, if you let kids lean into the things that they love and care about and are good about, instead of trying so hard to shape them into the person that you wish them to be, it can really come with some great results, and not to mention a better relationship, because he was estranged from his father because of that, and he was his mom's best friend because of how she handled it, and
Right,
like
and
that's a big takeaway for me.
his mom was an educator, a teacher, and still allowed him to drop out of high school, gave him permission, which she was not into, because
Yeah.
she's like, this is your path. This is the way it's gonna be. And not like what a lot of parents do, which is sort of like, okay, yeah, you pursue your dreams, but why don't you get that degree first? Make sure you have a plan B. So in case your major plan fails, at least you have something to fall back on. That's like what a lot of parents do. And that is solid logic. Okay. Absolutely good parental thinking. But for somebody who is going to risk everything or willing to do whatever to become famous, to become a rock star, to become whatever, that nonsense of like a plan B just doesn't factor in. And in the case of Dave Grohl, his mom wasn't being like, well, I really wish you would just get this diploma first, then you can go off and join your little band and travel around. It wasn't like that. It was like, okay, this is your opportunity and you're going to take it.
She made a comment when he was quitting school. And remember, they were in the office at school and he was dropping out. And she said, sometimes school isn't for you. She said that to him. Like, she's like, it's just not. And she recognized that. She realized it. And I thought that was like the most supportive thing you could say to your kid that's dropping out of school to go be a rock star.
Yeah.
So
I amazing.
Especially because, if you know anything about the sort of the underground punk scene, he wasn't leaving to go join like Katy Perry's band where he was going to be treated nicely and going to be riding on a comfortable bus and making a good living. It was like he's going to be living in a van with 5 other dudes that were being paid like $200 a show and living on a $5 a day per diem and basically bumming smoke. Like that was the life she was saying, yeah, go ahead and do it, but it obviously was the right call. Clearly, not everyone is cut out for that lifestyle. He was. It worked out for him. But yeah, it wasn't as though it was a very clear demarcation of like, okay, you're in high school, but you're getting this great opportunity to go be in this massive thing. Like, okay, you're about to go join some major band. No, you're joining some local band that just so it was extra risk on top of it. So I think that just shows the boldness of the move, because it really was. Dave Grohl was presented with a series of opportunities early in his life, and he seized them and didn't look back when he did it. And it was the smart move to go with Scream, even though he kind of hesitated a little bit because at first he kind of backed out and then he went back and did it. And then getting the opportunity for Nirvana and taking it. People think Nirvana was a big deal at that time. They weren't. Like when he joined, they were nobodies. So it wasn't as though, again, he was taking a gigantic risk of moving up to a place where he'd never been before, barely been, to live with someone that he didn't know. He knew a guy from one album, and that was it. They had a phone conversation, and now he's living there in this Olympia, Washington, in this shitty little apartment. So he was willing to take these bold risks because he had nothing else to lose. He didn't have a plan B. And that's maybe why he's succeeded.
One of the surprising things is when I think back to the days of Nirvana and when I was such a big fan, you just think like, oh, there's these guys and they're in this great band and they're having so much fun. And like, obviously, they're all best friends. And the reality of it, we learn in the book is that no, Dave Grohl had moved from Virginia to California, then to Washington. He was extremely homesick. He didn't have friends in Washington.
Remember, they were stranded in California. He didn't even move there. They were stranded there.
He sort of moved there by default.
Yeah. He got stuck there.
Yeah, he got stuck in California. Then, takes this risk to move up to Washington to be in Nirvana. And really, he and Kurt Cobain didn't really know each other that well. I mean, he didn't really know either of them when he joined the band. He and Kurt developed a relationship after that. But it's so incredible to think that it was just so much different behind the scenes than what you would imagine. And it's also incredible how short the time period of Nirvana was and how brief their relationship really was.
I was just going to say, he made a comment somewhere in the book that Nirvana was like 3.5 years of his life. And that's it. And that was 56, 57. And it was just such a short period of time. And he is going to be forever tied to those couple of years, no matter what. But it was an exceptionally short time. This was sort of brought up in some of the notes and stuff. Like, is Dave Grohl, do you see him as being did his mother make him a feminist? Like, is he a feminist rock guy, or is he just a sort of more sensitive dude? Did his daughters make him that way? Did his mother make him that way?
I'm going to take it, and then it can go to Shelley, who will be able to expand on what I'm trying to explain. Okay, so he's in a situation where he is raised with a single mother and a sister, and he sees what, not a great guy his dad was. Not to say he wasn't a great guy, but he really wasn't, considered the best father in the world. Like,
he wasn't there for him. Yeah.
No, not at all. And not in the way that Dave ever needed him to be. It was in the way that the father wanted to be when he showed up.
Right.
So, and then, he goes to the first wife, who we know very little about, but I did some light digging, and there's no drama. I mean, this guy kind of women, from what I know, from what I've been digging around, he marries his wife, who he's totally in love with. And then he has these kids, and that first daughter of his, like, wow, that was very kind. Like, beyond, like, kind isn't the right word. That is like the love he felt for her out of the gate was just incredible. And, listen, there's really nothing all that specific of things he's done for, women's rights, but maybe it just doesn't apply. But he's very supportive of his daughters. He's supportive of everyone around him that is female. And, I think, to answer the question, I don't know.
I think to get the answer, as we would say in grad school, we need to go back to the text. So the book, the structure of the book, I think gives us our answer. He does not begin the book with a story about himself really at all. Mm-hmm. And I remember when it started, I was like, why the fuck am I hearing about his daughter? Like, I thought this was a book about Dave Grohl. Not that I didn't appreciate that story. It just threw me off a little bit. And then we hear stories about his mom. And for me, early on, it was like, wow, this is a guy this is an intentional choice. And this is a choice to say, women are amazing. I had a supportive mom, and I owe my successes to her. And in that regard, I think he very much is a feminist. Now, Jen, to your point, he's not one of the main voices of Me Too or, any other type of women's movement, but I don't think
he's also not a scumbag with a reputation of being a bad guy who is shitty towards women or, whatever.
Right,
so that's
your typical rock star.
His contribution to the world being a better place for women is not being a douchebag and a pig all the time. I guess that, and frankly,
I'll take it because there's lots of douchebags out there that are real shitty to women. And so, and like I was about to say, I don't think you necessarily have to be attending a women's march to be a feminist. To be a feminist, the basic requirement is to acknowledge that men and women are equal. And I think in many ways, he puts the women in his life on a pedestal in the book. And so to me, that checks the feminist box.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a very good summary.
Let's talk about pillows and teeth.
Oh.
And how he learned to play the drums.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, because this was like, wow, this dude just had drumming inside of his soul from the get,
And now that he's not even a drummer anymore, it's so weird.
I know. I'm like, wait,
how is he not a drummer in 2024? Like,
yes,
unbelievable.
Right? So for the people who haven't read the book, he did not have a drum set growing up. He instead created a drum set out of pillows in his bedroom and would drum on them. And then when he wasn't doing that, he would play rhythms with his teeth. So much so that the dentist was like,
so crazy.
What have you been doing? Like, bro, you are grinding down your teeth. What's happening here? And he's like, well, that's how I play the drums, which that's got to be the first time the dentist has ever heard that.
Right. That is like the craziest explanation for why your teeth are all grinded down. Oh, I play drums in my mouth like all day long. It's
right.
like, I'm sitting here doing this shit. It's like, what are you doing?
Well, and it made me wonder if that's why he's always chewing gum. So like, I don't know if you guys notice this, but every time I've seen him on television playing, I've never seen him live. He's always chewing gum, which is not good for your vocal cords. That actually makes it harder to sing.
Really?
Yeah, it like tightens them up or something. Doesn't choir trick I learned back in the day.
I
Don't
see.
chew gum
Okay.
before a performance because it can affect your range, which clearly has not affected his because he's sings great. But it made me wonder if that's why he's chewing gum, because first of all, is it like a barrier?
Right, to
Is
keep
that, like,
from
helping out
grinding
his
his teeth
enamel?
even more, he has to have something in there to like stop him from doing it. I could see
Yeah.
that.
Or like, and I think he addresses this in the book where a lot of musicians will tap their foot, but for him, it's the teeth thing.
Well, look, a lot of
to keep the
drummers,
rhythm.
being somebody who rode around in vans with bands in the 90s, drummers are annoying as fuck because they can't sit still. They're always tapping on something or hitting something or tapping their jeans or tapping the drum. I mean, it's just like, Jesus, will you fucking stop over there with that shit? Well, okay, so he got into the drums. That's how he learned. It was a very unorthodox method. He also tells a story about his mom taking him to see this jazz guy. In DC, they would go for like jazz Sundays or jazz Saturdays or whatever and listen to guys. And he got his first drum lesson from this guy. And he realized like he has a lot to learn getting the one lesson, but he did learn a lot from his one drumming lesson because that's all he ever had his entire life was one lesson. He obviously got a lot out of it. And I think that
he
was
learned that he was holding the wrong end of the stick.
Yeah.
So that's huge.
That is pretty ridiculous that he was. I mean, even I know that shit. I mean, I don't know anything about drums. I know which end of the stick to hold, for crying out loud. Man, that was
But
crazy.
he was young. So, I mean, I guess
He was young.
Like,
I mean, I don't know exactly how old he was when he was going to those lunches with his mom. But again, that was just that's such a cool thing that his mom did for him, took him to those things because, he didn't have anybody else.
This is a guy that loves punk, right? Like Naked Ray Gun gets him into punk when he sees.
Oh, by the way, another woman
that show.
central into his life about that Naked Ray Gun. His friend in Chicago, right? It was like his mom's friend's daughter or something, or his cousin Tracy. I think it was.
Yes.
His cousin is a female cousin who turned him on to punk rock. Took him to his first show, that Naked Ray Gun show in Chicago. That was another central figure. Who knows if he hadn't gone to that show as a young kid, if she hadn't taken him to that, would he have been exposed to punk rock? Would that have been the path would he have been interested in Scream? Would he have ever wanted to join that band? Would he have wanted to tour around in a shitty van? Who knows? So another woman central to his life.
But the funny part, when he went to see the cousins and Tracy, he's like, I don't know. There was, he was with her every summer. And then he hears stomping upstairs and she comes down. black and
Yeah.
black hair and huge Doc Martens. He's like, wow. I mean, it just like
She changed.
that was it. That was
Yeah.
absolutely it for him. And he's like, okay, this is how it is.
Well,
Yeah, I
yeah,
love that story too.
yeah.
That was really well written.
And when he talked about how he saw Naked Ray Gun for the first time and how he realized, like, oh my God, this is my music. Like, this is where I fit into the world. I was like, oh my God, I totally get that. Like, I identify with that so much because
Yeah.
that was, you know, junior high school Shelley was like, when I discovered those kinds of bands, it was over. Like that was
Right.
it.
And I think
when I
that's-
went to my
that's-
first punk show, that was it. That was my musical life.
Getting involved in punk rock was the central thing for his life too, in terms of his musical life, because that led to his getting into the band Scream, which was a hometown band from the DC, Virginia area where he was from. I think the funniest story about that was when he called them about the audition and they asked him to come down and audition. And the guy says to him, okay, like, what songs of ours do you know? What do you want to try out? And he goes, well, I know all of them. And he goes, what do you mean
like
you
the
know
guy,
all of them? He goes, I know I know all your records, and I know 3 or 4 unreleased songs that you've just played live. I know them too. And the guy was just
and it's
like,
just him and Franz Stahl, right?
yeah.
That first meeting, and he says that Franz Stahl was like expecting him to say like, well, I'm gonna play, you know, Zeppelin or you know, something super obvious. And he's like, no, let's play a Scream song. And he's like, what?
Yeah, and he knew every one. He's like, which ones do you know? He's like, I know all of them.
And he lies and says that he's 21 when he was only 17.
Right.
Which,
but I think
the band did not find out until they're on tour and he can't get into a bar. Which is just
and he that whole audition with Scream and how he was so over prepared and everything just shows how talented he was and how, like, I don't think he thought that was over prepared. Like, for him, it was like, this is my favorite band. I want to be in that band. I have to show these guys I'm as good as they are. So he did that. He didn't have any of this pretension or this attitude of like, these guys would be lucky to have me, or who are these fucking guys? Like, whatever, I'll go down and play a song with them or whatever. Yeah, it wasn't. It was like, I learned everything. Every song I want to know, every single bit that they did, I want to know every single part, whatever. It was just important to him.
But I think this is the approach he has to life. I mean, I think with anything, he is all in. He is doing whatever he needs to. And, you know, it comes so naturally anyway that he just, you know, is able to do all of that. But yeah, this guy goes big or goes home. Doesn't go. Let me rephrase that. He goes big and he doesn't go home ever.
He didn't even think he was going to get into Scream.
Right.
He went to the audition so he could meet the dudes and play with them. And that was like the pinnacle of his expectation. And I think he probably knew every single one of those songs before he even knew he could audition, because he was that into it. And to your point, Jen, like, when he's into something, he's super into it. And that was just what he brought to the table naturally, which is amazing.
Subtitle of this book could be, I don't half-ass anything. I mean, he does everything.
I do the fucking work.
He does everything full ass. You know what I mean? Absolutely. No half-assing anything. That would be the subtitle for his book.
Yeah, from here on out, he's known as full ass Dave Grohl.
Yeah, he's full ass. In the Scream thing, we hinted at it earlier that he was stranded in California, and that's how we get into the second part of the book. So he does tell some pretty great stories touring around with Scream in the very punk rock days and
sleeping on a platform they built into a van. I cannot even imagine.
Which is not uncommon. I have seen that rig set up in other vans with bands before too. So I know that same setup. I know that where, you know, that van is your entire world and it's like all your stuff. You live in that van. He did that for a couple of years. They toured around the world.
Stink up the van. Can you even imagine, you guys?
Living hand to mouth.
Where are these guys showering? You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
like,
who knows?
That's a lot of stank happening.
Who knows? That's why I don't like bands staying at my house, because they all want to shower there. I don't want you wrecking my shower.
Do you remember the part where they were staying with the sister of one of the guys in the band, and they wouldn't, like, the mud wrestling?
Mhm.
When people like, do you remember this? In these women
Yes.
blood wrestle.
Well, yeah. So one of the guys in so what happens is they get to California on tour, and a lot of the shows get canceled. One of the guys ditches the band. The bass player, I think he took the band money that they had saved up, and he bolted down and stranded them there in L.A. And
Mhm.
fortunately, one of the guys in the band had a sister that lived in L.A. and she was a mud wrestler. And so that was their world, was hanging out with these mud wrestling chicks and living off spare dollar bills that they would give them with extra tips that they had.
But
Uh,
they didn't, I'm sorry to interrupt. They did not wrestle each other. They would wrestle men
right.
that would come in and think that they could take them. So this is so wrong in so many ways. But every time they were able to, beat the guy.
It's like
So
that. Oh, it's in Stripes. You've seen Stripes, right? They have a mud wrestling scene in Stripes where John Candy gets in there in the mud with the two women, and they're just not, kicking his ass and whatever. And it's like, you go watch Stripes. It's a funny
okay.
scene, but that's the
Love
thing, and that was an '80s thing of like guys going to watch girls in bikinis mud wrestle, but they mud wrestle dudes who think that they can beat these women in wrestling in mud. The whole point is nobody's there to win. I
So
mean, I don't I don't see what the winning part is. But anyways,
The
that was
dudes win because they get to touch the chicks.
that's probably true. Yeah. And the girls win because they walk away with a ton of dough for for beating the shit out of old fat guys who show up at this club who try to grope them. And so they walk away with a lot of dough. And that was the way that those guys were. They were living hand to mouth. They started getting part-time jobs and stuff. And you just forget in the days before cell phones and the days before all of these things, you could legitimately just be stranded somewhere. And I mean, I have a feeling if he would have called his mom and said, "Mom, I'm stuck here. Can you somehow scrape together money for a Greyhound bus ticket for me to come home?" She would have figured out a way to do it.
I thought the
But
same thing. I thought
but
the same thing.
he didn't, because he has that thing of like, this is the life, this is what I'm going to do. And when he's presented this opportunity to perhaps join Nirvana and maybe strand his band in LA, like, and just sort of leave them there, he took it
Mhm.
because it was the right move. He was in a dead end where he was. And I think that was maybe the first sign of showing that he does have a little bit of that cutthroatness. He's not 100% Mr. Nice Guy. He sensed an opportunity, and he saw that what he was in, the situation he was in right there, was not working out. He moved on it. And
He didn't make the decision lightly, though. He felt bad.
It was very bad. And he called his mom and had this dilemma about it, about how he doesn't want to ditch his friends and this kind of thing.
His mother told him that when he was talking to his mom. She said, "You have to take care of yourself."
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, she's absolutely right. That she was a very, very wise woman.
She was.
Yeah, that's
very smart.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
smart. So what happens is, before this tour ended and they got stranded in LA, they had played a show, Scream. Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic from Nirvana were in the crowd. They saw him play. They thought, wow, this guy's pretty good. And somehow or another, because none of us had email or texts or cell phones or anything, somehow
somebody gave him Kurt's number. Someone else gave him Kurt's number.
Yeah, somehow the word got out.
Or somebody
Nirvana
gave Kurt his number.
Right. They were looking for a drummer, and they liked Dave Grohl, and Grohl called Chris actually first.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Them.
Right.
Yeah.
He called Chris, said he had heard they were looking for a drummer, and Chris told him no. And this was part of the story that I did not know. This was not initially in the Nirvana origin story, that they told him, look, thanks, but we've decided to go with our friend Dan Peters, who is the drummer of Mudhoney, who they were using for a while. And they decided we're going to go with him. So sorry, we're not looking for a drummer. And Dave was just like, oh, okay, well, just keep this number in case anything changes. And fortunately, it did, because a couple days later, Kurt decided, no, we shouldn't take this guy from another band. How about we do look into this guy? Chris called him back. He said, you should call Kurt. He called Kurt. They spoke on the phone. Bam. Next thing you know, he's traveling up to Olympia, Washington, and Nirvana happens. So
I was incredible. I mean, I was almost in shock to find out that Kurt Cobain and Dave Grohl didn't have much of a relationship. I mean, a little bit, like it was like a work relationship. It was, and I know there were issues with Courtney Love and, where they're
Well,
all
yeah, and I mean, so much happened with them so fast. I mean, on the one hand, they're like nobody's living on, he's living on Kurt's couch in this tiny, shitty little place, and then a year and a half later, they're the biggest rock stars in the world. Kurt is married to Courtney Love. They're about to have a baby. They're everywhere. You know what? I mean, so much happens so fast you don't even realize it. But Courtney Love always talked shit about Dave Grohl and made a lot of comments in the press about how, Kurt hated him, wanted him fired, wanted to get another drummer. Again, whether any of that was true or not, I don't know. It could have been also he was all fucked up and he was just mouthing off. Because I've also heard him say 100 times that Nirvana was improved 100-fold by Grohl as a drummer, which he was. They were much better on Nevermind and In Utero as a sound than they were on Bleach. I love Bleach, but the drumming is not quite as good. Grohl
Can I
stepped it
posit
up
a theory here?
Yeah.
My theory as to why Courtney Love did not like Dave Grohl is that Dave Grohl probably had her number. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Like, he probably knew exactly the kind of shit that she was up to. If you didn't notice, I'm not really a fan. And it's like, if he knows something about her, then she's going to want to talk shit about him to discredit him, right? Like, if he's not a credible character, then whatever he says about her is not going to be believed. And I'm betting he could have talked a lot of shit about her in this book and instead made the very classy decision to not address her at all.
Grohl is known as one of the nicest guys in the music business. Like, that's his rep, is he's a nice guy. And this book definitely reinforces that because he doesn't have a mean word to say about anybody. He is a Mr. Nice Guy. Now, I'm wondering, is he really this nice, or is this an intentional sort of sculpting of his image? Because really, he's maybe not as nice, and this is a carefully crafted image. I don't know, but Jen, I think she has some ideas on this.
I'm going to tell you. So I did a very deep search on Google, and I just kind of kept going to see if I could find anything, rotten or awful or gossipy about him. And there's really nothing there, like at all. And, there were a few mentions of like, he was, really, he was sleeping with a lot of groupies. I mean, who wouldn't,
Who doesn't?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I mean, if he's single and, not with anyone, but I did find, and I feel bad like gossiping about Dave because I really like him, but it's just, here.
Hey, it's the juice. You have to.
Yeah, this is the juice with Jen.
No, but
this
he's
is
like
your segment.
so nice. He's just so good. But there is a rumor that with his first marriage, I believe he met her in a bar. They were married and they split up because of infidelity. Now, I saw that in a couple of places. I didn't go much beyond that, but he was young, and who knows?
His or hers?
His.
Well, and there's like no reference to his first wife, or maybe like one sentence or something.
Barely, yeah. It's just I got married and then I got divorced.
Yeah, you wouldn't even know he was even married. So it
There's
obviously.
a reason. I think there's a reason why that's there. I think
because that presents him in a bad light. If it was infidelity and it was his fault that he did it, that's another part of his carefully crafted image.
That's total goss. But I think a lot of this, and this goes back to whether or not, he's a feminist. I don't think he did I don't think he did that out of respect for his wife, and possibly even out of respect for the women, in the past. Who knows how that marriage ended? We don't know. No. But why, he's so into his wife. He's such a family man, and these kids, like, why is he gonna, disrespect her and talk about the 500 women he slept with when he was, 22 years old? I just think he's better than that, honestly.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, he is. He is better than that, and it's not a part of his persona. Unlike the Liz Phair book. Okay, so unlike the Liz Phair book, where that was a series of stories presenting her in the worst light possible. Dave's is the opposite, right? Which is all stories that present him in the best light possible. It's the opposite of horror stories. These are happy stories. But I know that he's had conflicts with Courtney Love. Okay.
Yeah. And he didn't mention her.
There were lawsuits going on between them with Nirvana and Courtney Love all the way up to, I mean, apparently they didn't really make up until the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was in like 2014.
Oh, I
And
saw that. Remember they kind of hugged?
they
But it
kind of
was like
hugged, and that was their first
really-
time sort of being like, all right, fine, I guess we're cool with each other. No mention of her. There was
No.
a conflict with Franz Stahl from Scream because he did ditch Scream. That's not what the conflict was. But when the Foo Fighters needed a guitar player after Pat Smear quit, he called Franz to come out. He was the guitar player of the Foo Fighters for a few months. They did some touring. When they went to go make the next record, it wasn't working out, and he was fired by management over the phone. Okay. That Franz guy was pissed. This was his friend. He plucked you out of obscurity when you were a high school kid. You were a nobody, and I put you in my band. And now it's 10 years later, and you're this major rock star, and you're putting me in your band, and you kick me out by your fucking manager calling me on the phone, whatever. So apparently they've made up years later too. But there's no mention of that conflict. They did mention Franz being in the band, Franz being out of the band. They don't mention anything, no details about that. William Goldsmith, the original drummer for the Foo Fighters. Okay. He was there on the tour, the very first tour. He was in all the original videos. When they go to make the second album, he wasn't kind of up to snuff studio wise. Like it just wasn't working out. And they sent the band home for Christmas. And then Dave came back on his own and redid the drums himself and didn't tell the guy. And the
That's
guy was
gotta hurt.
pissed. Now, that's not unheard of. It's not the first time that's ever happened to bands. It happened in Hole.
No.
It happened in Soul Asylum. It happened in other groups too. But the guy was insulted and he quit the band. Dave said he never wanted him to quit the band, but obviously the guy's ego was bruised. It's like, I'm not good enough to play on the album. Why am I gonna? They don't mention the conflict of that. That guy has talked shit about Grohl ever since then, ever since 1997.
Although, I mean, who on this planet is a perfect sweet baby angel? You know what I mean?
Nobody is, of course.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if I was going to write my own memoir, I'm not sure I would highlight my shittiest moments in life.
Well, no, and that's the difference between a memoir and if somebody else were to write a biography about Dave Grohl, we would maybe get a little bit different story. They would go interview Franz. They would interview Buzz Osborne. They would talk to his first wife, perhaps.
I don't know. He just seems like a really good guy. And I agree that they are all stories that paint him in an excellent light.
Yeah.
And I guess I fell for it. I don't know. I just appreciate his commitment to, his career and to music and to doing the things that he loves. And I think a lot of those moments that you mentioned, Dave, of conflict for him all have to do with choices about his career. And it really goes back to, do I stay stranded in California or do I move to Washington and join Nirvana? I have to make the choice that's best for my career, that's best for my music. And it seems like there's a theme there that when he does let somebody down, it's because there's a greater purpose at play.
Yeah, and I tend to think some of these stories about, Grohl committed to doing this thing with me and then he never did it, is maybe he just overpromised and couldn't deliver. He does seem like he's a little bit busy. He travels around the world like all the time. He's a little bit busy with his bands and stuff. And so, yeah, there was no address. Speaking of there was no mention of the fact that the Foo Fighters almost broke up in 2001, that he basically told the band he was done. And that's when he joined Queens of the Stone Age. Like a lot of people, they think that he just did that as a side. He did that because he was tired of the Foo Fighters. They had recorded an entire album, their fourth album. He thought it sucked and he didn't want to release it. And he was just completely turned off from the Foo Fighters. I get it. He wants to do his presentation. And I have no problem believing that he is one of rock's nicest guys. He doesn't seem like a douchebag. Some of it is just, it comes through naturally. You can tell sometimes. I mean, there are people who can fake it, sure, but I feel like Dave Grohl has been in the spotlight now for over 30 years. Okay, since 1991 when Nirvana broke big. If he were a secret closet asshole, I feel like it would have come out by now.
Yeah, I agree. He dated
and I think much of
I'm sorry.
and I think much of the conflict with Courtney Love, frankly, is jealousy.
Yeah,
she's jealous of him because he has the career that she wishes she had.
Well, and he's not gonna mention her in the book because he doesn't want to give her the airtime. I mean, why do it? And Courtney's Courtney, she'll probably take it and make a big, huge deal and, end up all over the Daily Mail.
Let's say, okay, so Nirvana ends in 1994. We know how that goes.
Doesn't discuss Kurt's drug habit much or his death much.
No, and in fact, there was a little bit more mention about
respectful.
There was a little bit more mention about the time where Kurt almost died than there was about the time when he actually died. So, for example, when he had that overdose in Rome, which was about a month before he actually died, and there were reports that he was in fact dead, he talks about that to greater extent than he does when Kurt actually died a month later, which is crazy. But
well, that's when his grieving began, because he felt the real pain of thinking he was dead, but also then when he found out he wasn't, he knew that was probably a likely outcome based on what was going on.
Well, and it's never been officially settled. Was the thing that happened in Rome, was that a suicide attempt or was that an accidental overdose? And I don't think it could ever be settled because Kurt never answered the question and he can't answer it now. So Nirvana ends, and for most people, that would probably be the end of the story. I mean, honestly, you're the drummer in a famous band. So what? Where do you go after that?
Right.
You know what I mean? Whatever happened to the drummer of, I don't know, all sorts of drummers, they usually don't have much of a career after that, or you go to play drums with someone else. Now, he had a rare opportunity of being asked to play with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. It's his first post-Nirvana thing. He got to go out and play with them on SNL, and it went really well, and they offered him the gig of, do you want to be in the Heartbreakers? And this is another sign, just like with California, and just like with the where he was presented a choice, and he made the right one. It was like, I have to decide what's right for me personally, and that is for me to pursue my music, not go the cushy route and ride with the Heartbreakers where I'd have my own bus and I'd live the comfortable lifestyle. And I mean, it would be great. Tom Petty's awesome. But he was presented with two stark choices. He chose the Foo Fighters choice, or to pursue his own career, and it worked out better for him. We know who he is now, because I asked the question, would we even know who Dave Grohl is or remember him if he had joined the Heartbreakers in 1994 instead? I mean, no, probably not.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
I mean, for better or worse, I have no idea. I don't know the names of any of Tom Petty's drummers.
Do you remember the part in the book where he was talking about Petty at Saturday Night Live? I mean, that was great. Do you remember this? And
that was
Petty
a cool section. Like, yeah. And they were like, and Petty was like, when he explained how Tom Petty knows what he wants and knows how to do it. And there was that time where they wanted him to move the monitor or something after they'd been rehearsing for like an hour. And Tom Petty was like, listen, man, this is not going to work. Trust me. You telling me to move this is not going to work. And they kept insisting on it. They moved it. It didn't work. And Tom was right. And he wasn't an asshole about it. He was just like, I told you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And worse, the reason why they wanted to move the monitor was so that you could get a better view of Dave Grohl.
Right.
Which is it's like, dude, we're talking about Tom Petty here, man. Like, Dave Grohl doesn't even want you to do that.
But I think it showed Grohl a little bit of, you can be assertive and you can state what you want without having to be a prick about it. Foo Fighters start. Let's get into. He forms his own band, the Foo Fighters. He makes his tape by himself, and I can state unequivocally that I was completely surprised that Dave Grohl knew anything but drums.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Foo Fighters initially came out, I was very skeptical. I saw them open for Mike Watt. I didn't pay that much attention to the Foo Fighters that night because I was like, it's the fucking drummer from Nirvana's new band. Who cares?
Yes, I remember very distinctly being like, well, this is for sure going to bomb for him.
Right. I was just like, I didn't even form an opinion. I was just like, who cares? That band was Kurt Cobain. Who gives a shit about anyone else? And now here we are almost 30 years later, realizing, yeah, that guy had a lot more talent than we recognized. And he's made, they've asked him, well, why didn't you ever do any songs with Nirvana? Did you ever bring it up to Kurt? Like, and he tells the joke of like, what's the last thing the drummer said before getting kicked out of the band? Hey, I've got a song I want everyone to learn,
Yeah.
It's not his place, right? He understood his role in the band. And he didn't try to like, hey, I'm really good. I know this other stuff. He understood where he was at. And as soon as presented with the opportunity, Nirvana's over. Now he's gonna, do it. And he obviously was quite talented. Foo Fighters are very, very famous. They become, we all know this. We don't need to tell individual Foo Fighter stories, but let's say we get into the 2000s and the sort of the family section of his book, which is really the second half of the book. And a lot of the Dave as celebrity, Dave as family man, Dave has as some of these other things, Mr. Troubadour, whatever. The Kennedy Center Honors is one of the opportunities he gets presented, the Oscars. He's like Mr. Everywhere, right? And I think that is the 20th century story, 21st century story of Dave Grohl is he is Mr. Everything. Now, what you wanted to address the Kennedy Center thing, Jen?
Yes. Yeah. I'm telling you, that whole chapter, however long it was on the Kennedy Center, like I could not get enough of that. Just hear how everything was handled, and they all rode on a bus together and they sang 99 bottles of beer on the wall with Steven Tyler and Dave Grohl and whoever else. I mean, could you see, like, it's just like, it's almost like the All-Star Jam at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where it's just a mess. I mean,
well, and I'm sure Dave had plenty of opportunities to be like Steven fucking Tyler.
Sure,
it's
he
funny,
did.
fucking
Sure
great, because that's what he did with that was okay. So my one little annoyance in the book is that when Dave gets so excited about all of these rock stars, and whenever he does, it's and then I was sitting there next to Joe fucking Walsh, every single time it would be so and so fucking so and so. It was just like, all right, guy. Easy there. Like, I get it. That was my one little annoyance with the book was just that.
With the Kennedy Center, it was hysterical to me that he was struggling being a part of it because of how he felt about George Bush. And when George Bush called him dude. So freaking funny. But,
Yeah.
I used to watch the Kennedy Center Honors every year. And then, it's kind of the same format. And if you're interested in who's, whatever, I catch it when I can. But when he's saying, okay, they were inducting Paul McCartney and he sang with Norah Jones. Like, I cannot stand Norah Jones.
I'm with you on that.
Me too.
There's no affect. There's just, I don't know what it is. I mean, I almost fell asleep to that. So I think that, he'll do whatever he needs to do to get, I mean, he's inducting Paul fucking McCartney into the Kennedy Center, right? So that's a big freaking deal.
What's funny is he mentions the Paul McCartney thing and how he played Blackbird in front of Paul McCartney. Well, when I was on YouTube and I was looking for that clip, what I found was Dave Grohl playing Band on the Run in front of Paul McCartney and with Barack Obama sitting right next to Paul McCartney, right in front of him. And he's 2 feet away and he's with an electric guitar playing Band on the Run with a band. And I was like, he didn't reference that? That sounds pretty fucking cool. That's not George Bush. That's Barack Obama sitting 2 feet from you and Paul McCartney, and you're sitting there doing Band on the Run. I don't know. I thought that would have been worthy of a mention too, but I guess not. I guess that wasn't that significant to him. I don't know.
It's like the best song. What did Jimmy Fallon say about it when Paul was on? He's like, it's like 4 songs in one. Just all over the place. I love that song. But yeah, I think his oh shucks, humbleness just kind of got like, okay, Dave, you're good. Like, you're friends with Paul McCartney. Didn't him and Nancy, his wife, came over to see the baby when she was born, and remember that part?
And his daughter learned how to play or got her first piano lesson from Paul McCartney. That relationship between them was so sweet. I just loved the way he talked about Paul McCartney and
and he did admit too that no matter how well he gets to know Paul McCartney, there still is that first minute when you see him where you're just like, it's Paul McCartney from the Beatles. I mean, you're just like, you can't help but get that way. Like, that's just because he is as big as Dave Grohl is, as big a deal as he is, like you're not as big a deal as Paul McCartney. Like he's the biggest of the big. I was gonna say things I was surprised about learning in the book. There weren't that many because he was Mr. Nice Guy. But I would say what surprised me was a lot of the references to drinking. He talks about drinking and getting loaded a lot. And for somebody who talks about how they don't do drugs and all of that, but he does make a lot of references to smoking weed and drinking alcohol. Aren't those drugs too? I mean, I'm just saying. He talks a lot about drinking, a lot more than I ever thought that he would have.
I was surprised by that too. And I thought that as we, grew up with him and we got into his, adult with kids phase, that would taper off, and it didn't. I mean, he's still, which no judgment here. Listen,
right. I'm not saying it's a bad.
No room to judge. I like my wine, but yeah, I just was surprised.
It was just a lot of references to it. Another surprise, in addition to his sort of aw shucks sort of thing, but related to that, is just like his constant expectation that everybody hates the Foo Fighters or is going to think what they're. I mean, people love the fucking Foo Fighters and have the entire time. So when he's like, "Oh, we're going to go on the show," I don't think anyone's going to like it. It's like, dude, come on. People are going to like it. I mean,
I don't know. I mean, maybe that's his humility. I
mean, maybe.
That did not stand out to me. Like, I don't know. I experience a little bit of that imposter syndrome in my own career as a writer. It's like I've written, name that thing like a blog post 500 times, but there's always that little grain of like, well, I hope I did it right. You know what I mean? And I kind of get it. I don't know.
Okay, I want to talk about in the end of the book where he talks about becoming friends with Danny Harrison, and he's sitting down. Did you guys have this in your book? Because I listened to it.
Yeah.
Okay. So where he's talking about Danny Harrison and he's not realizing who it is, and then he starts figuring it out because he gives him a CD with George Harrison on it, so it all came together. And then a couple of weeks later, some time later, there was a show. What was it? The concert for George? Or there was, I think it was.
Yeah, it was
concert for George.
Memorial concert.
And he was like. He's like, and we win. I mean, we were shocked by our seats and we were shocked. I mean, like he's always in such awe. Like he's like probably the biggest face of rock and roll, honestly.
Danny fucking Harrison.
Yeah, exactly. Danny fucking Harrison. So then, they leave the concert and he's like, well, we're going to the VIP party and like, you can go left where everyone is, or you can go right where they just put you for later. He's like, oh my God. And we went left. Unfucking believable. Like he's in awe.
And all of a sudden there's Ravi Shankar. What the fuck?
And then if I had to listen to 23 minutes of Ravi, I would no.
I thought that too. I was like, that's too long for a song.
And who his daughter is? Nora Jones. Doesn't make sense.
Oh, see, that makes more sense because
I didn't know that.
Boring is in their DNA.
Yeah,
boring is in their DNA. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was just in so much shock that he was a part of this thing for George. And I'm like, all right, dude, come on. Come on.
And then,
but
okay, so what
is a true music fan.
Yes.
Yeah. You got to give him that. He's a giant music fan.
I'm not upset with him. I just think,
one story that I was telling this to somebody else and they said, no, I believe him. So I'm curious what you guys think. So he tells this story in the book about the time when him and Taylor Hawkins, when he left California, was moving to Virginia and they were going to drive across country and they were going to go a couple hours out of their way to go to Texas to go to Pantera's strip club. Right. They decide, oh, we're buddies with Pantera now. Right. So we're good friends with these guys. So I'm going to go down to their strip club, me and Taylor, and we're going to go 400 miles out of the way to go to, because Dallas is not on the way from LA to Virginia, clearly. So they stop there. Dave loses his wallet at some point, and along the way, they get to the club, they walk up, and they weren't allowed in because Grohl didn't have ID. Now I'm saying, dude, it's 1997 or 98 or so. You're the fucking biggest, one of the biggest rock stars in the entire world. Your face is on MTV. People forget how often those Foo Fighters videos were in massive rotation on TV all the time. The one with the
Because
Mentos
MTV actually played
played
videos.
videos. It was their
Yeah.
Mentos video. Remember the Mentos video they
Yes.
did? And the okay.
Yeah.
And the one. So are you really telling me that this door person wasn't like, oh, I recognize you, dude. You're Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters and Nirvana. Oh, nobody recognized him and they made him leave? Come on, dude. I call bullshit on that one.
Yeah, overall, I really enjoyed reading about Dave Grohl. And, I think everything you see for the most part is what you get. And
Yeah,
It does seem like that.
I don't think that I did comment that he skews things towards the positive and tells stories that paint him in the best light. That's okay. It's not like if there were a ton of rumors to the contrary, that would be one thing. If it was just, oh, everybody thinks this guy's an asshole and I'm telling this story about how my shit doesn't stink and I'm so great and everybody loves me, they would be contrary to what you already sort of think. But everybody already thinks Grohl is a good guy. So this reinforces it and doesn't make you question it like, well, is he though? Whatever. I mean, I'm just saying, I believe it. But I would have liked a little more conflict, a little more juice, a little more drama, something, a fight with somebody.
Coming from Britney and her to, Liz Fair and her hooking up with half her band in a blackout. I still love that chapter. That sounds
this is the absolute antithesis of the Liz Fair book. Like I said earlier,
it is.
Liz Fair was, I'm going to put myself showing in every single negative situation, making me look like shit in every scenario. And now, Dave Grohl, I'm going to paint myself in the best light and make myself look awesome in every story. I mean, how do you make yourself look bad in the story where you fly from Australia all the way back to the United States just to do a daddy-daughter dance and then have to turn around and get back on the plane and fly all the way back to Australia to do a show like later that night? Like,
oh yeah,
that's a great story.
Meanwhile,
cool.
having like the double barrel flu on the flight.
Oh,
Ooh,
double barrel.
rough.
Okay, we did forget to address one thing that was just, I'm a little too close to the mic. I'm sorry. One thing that is just freaking nuts, where he broke his leg and kept performing. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that?
He fell off the freaking stage.
Yeah.
Dave fucking Grohl
went back up. This is a dedicated dude. I mean, there's no denying.
Right, and then they built that
guy.
throne. They built that big throne. Okay, so Shelley, you need a minute?
I need a minute.
Okay.
So the first part of my minute is that if you do not have the extended version, the first story that comes after it, the first story of the extras is called The Box. And it might have been my favorite part of the book. So one of the great things about his mom, as we sort of discussed, is that she very much nurtured him as an artist. And I think one of the big takeaways from his book is how important art is, music, any art form is. And, unfortunately in our society, we tend to downplay the importance of that art is an extra. And this book shows how important art can be to a young person. He says very often how music is really what got him through some tough times. Mm-hmm. Music is what shaped his entire life. Now he's giving that gift to other people. He does not say that he's the one giving that gift. I'm saying that. That's right. Shelley editorializing. But, I just think it shows how important it is to nurture those things and support those things and not try to strip them away from, the people who are artists. And then the part that really made me feel teary and so inspired in that extra called The Box was that, his point was, if you love something, do whatever you can do to make it happen. If that means you're playing the pillows in your bedroom, clicking your teeth to learn how to be a drummer, if that's something totally opposite from music, you don't have to do it the conventional way. He hates the box. There's not a box for doing the thing that you love. Like, you make the box, or you live outside of the box if you need to. It's like, you don't need the money. You don't need the drum set. what you need is the passion, and just find a way. And like, it's okay to blaze your own trail. It's like, you don't have to have all of the music lessons. You don't have to have, you don't have to know how to read music. He doesn't know how to even read music. But if you just take the steps, like, you can get there. And I just loved how much he reinforced that people should really follow their passions. And I don't know, it just really meant a lot to me. Just in terms of, as a writer, as a creative person, it's like, just keep going, because a lot of times the world really wants to tamp down artists.
Yeah.
And, everybody just has to keep going. And I just really loved that as sort of a call to action to the world. When he talked about the first time that they played Smells Like Teen Spirit live and the crowd just lost their shit, it gave me such goosebumps. Like, can you imagine being in that crowd? Like, Dave, you said when you were in the record store, it was like, holy shit, we can't even work. We just have to keep playing this. But can you imagine seeing that live? And
well, look, I think
amazing.
the impact of Smells Like Teen Spirit has been forgotten, or isn't. You can't feel it unless you were there at that time and remember what the world was like before. Because now Nirvana is such a part of classic rock canon, right? It's like you just discuss them as part of the 90s. They're one of the great bands of that era. And you don't even really need to enter into the discussion about how they transformed. And for at least a period of about 4 or 5 years, they did turn the music industry on its head. I mean, it turned itself back for sure. But for a little while, it did look like there was a lot of optimism, and really things were going to change, and it was, whatever. And now people, I don't think, can appreciate that, just how big a deal that was. But on the other hand, if young kids are wearing Nirvana t-shirts and they have no idea who the band is, I mean, that means they've transcended into this other level part of pop culture that it almost doesn't matter. I mean, I know kids who wore Beatles stuff and they didn't necessarily know the Beatles either. So it just
I want to ask something of our viewers. If there is anybody watching right now and you haven't listened to Nirvana, you don't know who we're talking about, or you weren't a fan, I would love it if you would go and listen to Smells Like Teen Spirit and come back and leave a comment about your thoughts, because I want to know how that hits. If you're new to Nirvana, I want to know if it hits you the way that it hit us, or if that bird has flown. And not to reference Susanna Hoffs there, but I would love to know that. We talked about how Nirvana's popularity was probably the reason for their demise, and more personally, Kurt Cobain's demise. But I have got to tell you, like, when he talked about how in the 90s, there was like cool music and not cool music. And like, you didn't want to get caught liking music that wasn't considered cool. But also, sometimes it was hard to tell like what music was and what wasn't. And I just wanted to talk about how that really was such a hallmark of the 90s. Like, I remember personally feeling that, like, ooh, I kind of came across this new band I liked, but if I introduce it to my friends and they don't like it and it's not cool, like, I'm going to look like an asshole. You know what I mean?
Well, there
I'm
was
not gonna be cool anymore.
The massive divide was in like, are you an indie band or are you a major label band? And the assumption was that if you're on a big label, you're a sellout, you're a compromise, you're whatever, you've sold out. And Nirvana actually obviously took that to heart, because they were on an independent label. They did go to a major. Of course, they faced that accusations of selling out. But on the other hand, what you realize when you get bogged down by that kind of mentality, that you end up missing a lot of great music. If it didn't come up the right way, through the right label, through the right scene, through the right whatever, I couldn't like it because it was going to be a reflection on me. And I'm shitty because I like this shitty music, and there was this massive divide. I definitely felt that mentality, and I'm glad that we're past that period.
It's a catch-22, because you want people to like your music, you want to make money, but if too many people like your music and you make too much money, you're considered a sellout. So like, what are you supposed to do? And in a lot of ways, like, Nirvana didn't have a choice. The instant Smells Like Teen Spirit hit the radio, that was it. they were going to be popular. They were already sold out, whether they liked it or not. And yes, it was their choice to go to, Geffen and like be on a major label and whatever, but they were going to be popular no matter what.
Yeah.
And I think Kurt Cobain wanted Nirvana to be famous. I think he wanted them to be successful. I think it was once it happened, it was a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Something I wanted to say about the 90s and the building on the sellout thing. The 90s are one of the best times ever. But at the same time, like really not giving a shit was like being cool. Like it was cool to not give a shit. And it was cool to be like sarcastic about everything. And I have to say, looking back, it's refreshing that we're not in that time anymore. Even though if I had to pick a decade of my life, like that's the decade I'd go back to, right? Because of the music and
let's talk about our impressions of Dave Grohl after we read the book, and did they change in any way? Jen, do you want to go first on that one?
Yes, and I'm going to throw it back to the 90s with my earphones because my house is going to erupt in a couple minutes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
you're fine.
Totally.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. So, again, like he just kind of bugged because he's everywhere, but I don't not like him, but now I like him even more. And I get why he's everywhere. I mean, that's what I understand now is he's the face of everything because he's Dave Grohl, Dave fucking Grohl. And, I enjoyed the book. I thought it was absolutely fine. Of course, I like a little bit more gossip and a little bit more, band shenanigans. But at the same time, he's good. He's a great dad and he's a great, like there's nothing he can really not do. I mean, even performing a show with a broken leg. So in the end, I'm Dave. I like Dave. I'm not as angry with him anymore as being everywhere.
So your impression is more positive after
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Shelley?
My impression of Dave Grohl is more positive as well. I respect his work ethic like crazy. Just want to give a quick shout out to his coffee habit and the reason why he was drinking 5 cups of coffee a day and felt like he was having a heart attack was because he was taking care of his kids and he was in multiple bands and, just trying to do it all. And I really need everybody to go and watch the Fresh Pots video.
I'll try and link to it if I can find
YouTube.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll link to it below.
It's hilarious. But yeah, no, it's really positive. I think he's got an incredible work ethic. I think that he's a positive human. I think that he is a very loving, giving person. And I have a lot of respect for him. It wasn't that I didn't before. It's just that obviously knowing more about him, my respect has really grown.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely.
I was a fan going in. And I thought he was a good guy, generally good guy. I, like Jen, get sort of annoyed sometimes that he is the spokesperson for everything. Why he's the only go-to person to talk about music in every documentary setting or in any sort of discussion. Having said that, so what? I mean, he's the guy to go to. I guess there's not much you can do about that. Then maybe these other people they try just aren't that articulate or aren't that interested or aren't very good on it. That would be my guess. I didn't come up. I mean, like I said, my impression is largely the same. I went in liking Dave Grohl. I come out liking Dave Grohl. I was hoping for a little juice, a little drama, a little controversy somewhere.
We got a DUI in Australia. Now that was good.
The which one?
When he got a DUI in Australia.
Okay, there's a little bit of drama on that one. That was about it. If you're looking for a book to sort of change your opinion on Dave Grohl, and you're coming at it like you like him and you want something to make you not like him, you're not going to find that in this book.
But you know what? If you are someone who has a passion for music, as a musician or you're a painter or a writer or you name it kind of artist, I think this book can give you a lot of inspiration in terms of how to keep fighting the good fight and how to just not give a shit about the negative forces that are around and just to keep going. And I think that's a great reason to read it.
Oh, and the last thing I wanted to mention was since the book was published in 2021, Taylor Hawkins passed away. on March 25th, 2022. And Dave's mother, Virginia Grohl, died August 17th, 2022. So those are two very significant people in his life that were not addressed in the book because it happened afterwards. So that'll have to be for the second book. But if somebody was wondering if he was going to talk about Taylor Hawkins or why there was no mention of that, that's because it did happen after the fact. So that's why there's no real mention of those things. But I imagine it would have been a pretty significant chapter to have talked not only about Taylor, but about his mom's death too, because now that we know how important his mom was throughout his life, the fact that she passed, it would have been a great chapter, and there'll have to be a part two, I guess.
I disagree.
I can hear you. Yeah.
I think he is incredibly private and guarded about things like that. And I don't think he would give many details into everything. I think he would talk about the loss and what it, his mother, I think, all bets are off with her. But I think with Taylor, that was a sad day, wasn't it? I think that he would keep things very private and very practical and just be very, very discreet about everything.
Well, just the way he talked about Kurt's death, and also we didn't address his best friend Jimmy passing away.
Yeah,
that was so sad.
No, that was
right. And he didn't say a lot about what happened there. He more talked about the relationship and how much he loved them and missed them. All right. Well, we covered a lot of really good ground today, I feel like. I hope everybody watching feels like we did as well. Just want to thank everyone for joining us, and we hope we will see you for our next book club pick.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.